Hail Satan!
Yay!
Hail Satan!
Hail
Tonight.
Satan!
Hail! All right, that seems to be working. Hi! Thanks for
Hi.
bearing with us during a slight technicality. It's so nice to see you all. Hi, I'm Charlie
Hey.
J. Anders.
I'm Sari Vulgaris.
Hi!
Woo! So lovely to be here in Portland. Oh my gosh, y'all are the best. This is such a lovely event. So cool.
It's my can't miss it every year.
Aw, I'm
Yeah.
glad I didn't miss it. So great.
Yeah, so we're just here to have a chat and then include you all in the chat with audience questions. I have a list of questions, but we'll just see where it takes us.
Yes, no, 3 rutabagas, vermilion.
Wow. Your writing process is rutabagas, really?
100%.
That's what I've been missing all this
100%
time.
rutabagas. It's all about the rutabagas. I just stick all my fingers into different rutabagas, and then I just mash them on the keyboard. And it works really good. Works so good.
There, I've been using 2 fingers like a sucker. So, Charlie Jane, you are an amazing writer. I feel confident in saying that.
Well, thank you.
Yay!
Just to start out, just hot takes from the stage here. You've written novels, short stories, nonfiction, and now you've made a foray into writing comics. So I was curious to start with, how did you get into comics? What draws you to comics as a reader and a writer?
Yeah, I've always loved, sorry if I'm too loud, let me know. If I'm also if I'm not loud enough, let me know. I've always loved comics as a reader. I've been a fan of comics forever. Definitely since I was in college, I got really into comics back then. And I'd always wanted to write comics, and I had always it's actually hard to get into comics. And it's a very different thing than other kinds of writing I've done. So it was just it was a lot of scratching at the door. I had a couple of short things and little anthologies here and there of comics. There was a feminist comics anthology that came out 15 years ago that I had a story in. And, but eventually, basically there's this editor at Marvel named Sarah Brunstad who's, I think her Twitter bio actually says queer bitch. So I think that's, she's amazing. And she kind of reached out to me 6 years ago about doing some writing for Marvel, and we had some conversations and didn't go anywhere for a very long time. And then eventually, we kept in touch, and then I started doing short little things. I did a short She-Hulk thing, I did a short Squirrel Girl thing, and then it was let's do a bigger thing. And we had been talking about me creating a trans superhero for Marvel for a long time, and we'd gone through many different phases of that idea, and finally we decided to just go for it, and that's how Escapade happened. But it was just basically it was a long process of just kind of going back and forth, and me being well, I guess nothing's going to come of this, and then eventually something came of it, and I was oh, that's awesome, yay. So
Yeah.
stuff just sometimes stuff takes a lot longer than you think it will.
That's real. Yeah. So, I don't know. So yeah, let's talk about Escapade. You co-created this character. I think she's really freaking cool.
Oh, thank you.
Again, with the hot takes. Don't cancel me for this bold position.
Canceled.
But
Done.
so yeah, well, you've talked about how you came to create her. I'm just curious, what were some key aspects of her and her story that was important for you to get on the page?
Yeah, so I love, I wrote an essay about this in my newsletter a while ago. I love naive tricksters. I love tricksters who play pranks and kind of pull the wool over people's eyes, but also are kind of easily fooled themselves and are kind of naive and don't understand how the world works. And I feel that was something I really wanted to get to with Escapade. I wanted somebody who was not on board with the whole mutant lockstep status quo thing of we're all gonna live in this weird patriarchal kingdom under King Charles, not that King Charles, the other King Charles. We're gonna have to like distinguish between our King Charleses now.
Topical.
Apparently, there's now another King Charles. I don't know who that guy is, but I'm talking about Charles Xavier, the original King Charles.
Boo!
Well, I don't even know any other King Charles. But yeah, and like, it was really important to me. Like, I'm really glad that they're selling the Pride issue here, because the Pride issue is where I laid down a lot of stuff about Escapade that I think is really important, and I hope more people can read that. It was really important to me that, like, she's trans and she's a mutant, and her being a mutant is not like a metaphor for her transness, and her being trans is not a metaphor for her being a mutant. Those are two aspects of her identity that are separate and intersectional, and I worked really hard on that aspect. That was something that I thought was really important, because you do get this thing sometimes where it's like, oh, mutants are a metaphor for gay people, and it's like, no, why don't they just have gay people?
Yeah.
We don't need a metaphor for gay people. Everybody, we could just have people be gay. So I was like, that's something that I really was strongly that I felt strongly about, that I really pushed for.
Yeah, here. One of the things that I really loved about reading that Pride special and just reading, Escapade's continued stories is like, it's just right there on the page. It's just like, hi, I'm Sheila and I'm trans, she, her, etc. And like, it talks about it, but the stories are about other things too. But it's a lot bolder than what we've been able to see from Marvel in the past, right? I also really love that you're, continuing stories with some of the queer gang that Vita Ayala created.
I know.
Before
oh my
you.
God.
And I love that the groundwork that they laid, where they put all these queer characters in there, and they were kind of background, but they were very these people are lesbians and this person is transmasc and this person is whatever, and now we're getting to see that fleshed out more because of that seed that they planted.
Yeah, I mean, one character that Vita created, who I was able to use in the 3 issues of New Mutants that are now collected in that trade paperback that's for sale in there. It's bundled with the Pride issue. It's New Mutants Volume 4 is what it's called. It's really confusingly named. But anyway, one thing that, Vita created this character named Leonara Eng, who is a trans woman who is super butch, which is something you don't see that often. Super butch trans woman, who actually goes by Leo, but uses she, her pronouns. And, I feel like Leo had a bunch of blink and you'll miss it appearances in previous issues of New Mutants. And Vita asked me, can you use Leo? And I was like, yes, I sure can. And so, and I wasn't able to use her as much as I wanted to, but I was able to use her a fair bit. She's definitely one of the characters who's featured in those 3 issues. There was a lot to get into 3 issues of comics, and it was that was a whole thing. But I really love her. I think she's a really fun character, and I know she's going to appear in some other places coming up, so I'm excited for that. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of queer characters in Marvel who are just kind of relegated to the background, who just pop up occasionally, and it's really nice when they get to kind of take center stage. And those 3 issues of New Mutants just ended up being basically a bunch of trans and non-binary and genderqueer kids plus Wolfsbane, who is kind of, I don't know if Wolfsbane is officially queer or not. I've never quite been able to get a sense of what...
She is in my heart, that's all.
I feel like if I write Wolfsbane for longer, I'm going to try to clarify that question, but I'd have to talk to the higher-ups and find out if there's what they think about that. I haven't had that conversation about Wolfsbane, I'm going to be honest. So, but yeah, it was a very queer thing, and yeah, I loved that.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're able to do that for Wolfsbane, you'll make a lot of people very happy, including me.
Maybe, we'll see.
But actually, Leo Eng was one of the characters that I wanted to talk about, because I also really love how she has this butch presentation. She doesn't fall into I think of the character that Gail Simone created, Alyssa.
Oh, Alyssa Yo.
Alyssa Yo, yeah. She had this very look, I look just like any other girl, and you wouldn't know I'm trans unless I told you. And then she tells her, and then and I love Alyssa, but I really love seeing representation of trans characters who don't fit the gender norms of comics art.
Yeah.
Right.
Like Sheila also, Sheila and Leo are 2 trans women characters who don't have that 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 petite curvy frame of like, you know, the girl model in comic superhero art.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot with Escapade, and like, I hope we've done a good job of keeping that going, and like, because it's hard when you have a character who's being drawn by a lot of different artists to kind of police that. But with Ted and Ro, where Ted Brandt and Ro Stein, who co-created Escapade with me, amazing artists. Me and Sarah and Ted and Ro and Anita, the assistant editor Anita Okoye, who was heavily involved as well. We had a lot of conversations about this because, like, actually, this is an example of Twitter being super useful. I know, shocking. Twitter is like one of those things where it's a garbage fire, but occasionally, like, something really good comes out of the garbage fire. Usually, the garbage fire incinerates something that deserves to be incinerated, I guess is what I would say. But in this case, there was some discussion on Twitter that I saw about, can we please have comics characters who are trans women who do not look like they were drawn by, and I apologize for singling an artist out, but Greg Land. You know, I feel like that's just easy because everybody who's read enough comics, if I say the words Greg Land, you get a mental image, like you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so can we have people who don't look like that, who don't look like, you know, they don't have realistic bodies or realistic anything. And, you know, can we have trans girls who, you know, maybe who look like normal people, but also look trans and like are visibly trans without it being like, you know, necessarily a thing. Like, I don't know, it's complicated. Like, who look realistic and look believable and look, you know, like they transitioned at some point. And so the way that translated, the way I think that we explained it, the way Sarah explained it to the artist is, we want Sheila to be a little thick, like THICC. And luckily, there was a model for that, which was like, Sheila was like, draw her a little bit like Squirrel Girl. Because Squirrel Girl also is a character who is not skinny and who is not like, obviously Squirrel Girl is not trans, I wish, but Squirrel Girl is not trans. She's just like, she's like a girl who has kind of a normal body. And so, you know, that's kind of what we settled on. And I hope that we've been able to keep that going. I feel like, you know, Sheila has a certain look now, and it's not that kind of stereotypical woman in comics look.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
hard to talk about this stuff sometimes, but I'm glad you brought it up.
It is, yeah. It was one of the first things that popped out to me in her design, and so, yeah, I wanted to.
Oh my God.
And yeah, I mean, actually, let's talk about like the artists that you work with. Like you've worked with several like really cool artists now throughout like several Escapade stories. So like, what was it like working with an artist team, you know, as opposed to like say writing prose where you're just like putting it all out yourself?
It's so different, and like, I mean, I wrote an essay for my newsletter about how writing comics is really hard, even if you've written a ton of like prose fiction, and I think I kind of explained it really well in there, so check that out. It's buttondown.email/Charlie Jane. And I feel like, you know, when you're writing comics, you really have to like think about things differently in terms of like making sure that every page is legible and has action on it, and like you can kind of follow it with your eye and stuff. And a lot of that's decisions the artist is making too, but you can work with the artist to make that easier, or you can make it a lot harder for the artist and for the reader. And I feel like I went on a huge learning curve with that, in terms of getting better at that. With Ted and Ro, who drew the Pride issue story, it was really great because they were super collaborative, and there was a lot of like, I would be like, I want like, and I always try to cram too much crap into a page. That's a failure mode of mine. I'm always like, because I'm gonna date myself. I grew up reading comics back in the day, and like even in like, I was reading comics in the 90s, like the mid 90s, and I was also getting comics from like the dime bins or the quarter bins, a lot of which were from the 80s, and I was reading like, you know, you read like, look at Watchmen. Okay, Watchmen's a good example. Lots of comic books people still read. And Watchmen, there's like, how many frames per page? How many panels per page? Like 20? Like, it's just like freaking Dave Gibbons is just like, oh yeah, I'll draw like 20 little drawings on this page, no problem. Oh yeah, I'm British, I don't have any life. I'm just gonna like, I've met Dave Gibbons, he's a delightful guy, but you know, he just was willing to sit there and draw like 20 little drawings, and Alan Moore was like, and I want there to be a sphinx, and I want there to be a guy doing jumping jacks, and I want there to be like, 15, marmosets doing like in a complex design that I will email I will send you the specifications of, and like there's like 20 things on one page, and they're all like little drawings, and like, God bless him, like Dave Gibbons was like, yes, I will do this, and like. Comics aren't like that anymore. Nobody does comics that way anymore. Nobody does like 20 panels on a page anymore. And so I learned like you have to keep it to like 4 to 6 panels per page. 4 is really good if you can do it. 5, you can get away with. 6, you really have to think about it. 7, you're in the danger zone. Kenny Loggins is yelling because you're in the danger zone. Sorry, I'm just dating myself right left here. I'm just like, how many more 80s references can I just cram into this conversation? But
Not enough.
It was like, so Ted and Ro were really great about being like, yeah, you wanted to have all this stuff on the page. What if we did it this way instead of just like the like weird whatever you were envisioning? And they were great about checking in with me. And then for the 3 issues of New Mutants I did with Alberto Albuquerque, I unfortunately did not really have a lot of communication with Alberto, which, that was just the way that that's the way that it was being done. Like, Sarah just sent my scripts to Alberto, and then I saw, like, much later I saw the artwork, and I didn't have a chance to weigh in on stuff. So I actually asked Sarah, can I be a little more involved in the process? And luckily, she was super nice about letting me do that. So for New Mutants Lethal Legion, that's been, like, a dream. That's been a dream process where... I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation of everybody's name because I haven't met them in person, but Enid Balam and Elisabetta D'Amico, who are the art team on that, I've gotten to see the roughs, I've gotten to see the layouts, I've gotten to see the sketches, and I've gotten to kind of weigh in a little bit earlier in the process and be like, yeah, we really need to be able to see this on this page, and like without being such a jerk about it, hopefully. And like, but they've been great about like just communication back and forth the whole time, and I really feel like in comics, the more communication there is with the artist, between the writer and the artist, the better product you're going to get in the end. And I feel like that shows, and you can just see it in those issues of Lethal Legion, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've loved all the art on the Escapade stories, but I really Lethal Legion has just been really popping so far. And also much gratitude to the designers of Wolfsbane's lesbian Willy Wonka look.
Oh my God, that was just a nid. Like I didn't even remember what I said. I was just like, yeah, Wolfsbane shows up wearing like civilian clothes, and it's just this incredible outfit. Enid just brings so much stuff, and like that first issue of Lethal Legion, like Enid added so much. Like in my script, Jonathan, the little Wolverine, wasn't in it at all, and Jonathan just shows up, and it's like, oh my God, it's so great. And like every issue, there's things that Enid just adds that he decided to throw in there that I'm just like, oh my God, I love it so much. It's so great. Every time I'm gonna miss every day waking up to another email from Enid with like beautiful artwork. It's just, it's the best way to start your day. I swear to God.
I can imagine, yeah. Well, but how are we on time? I should leave time for questions.
4:24. We are so good.
Okay, good. Then, how about if we circle back to like X-Men? Because you mentioned like wanting to do X-Men. You mentioned wanting to do like stories that weren't like lockstep in the Krakoa status quo and stuff. I'm curious, like, what is kind of your, like, what's your origin story with the X-Men? How did you first encounter them? Like, what are some characters and storylines in X-Men that you connect with? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so gonna drag it back to the 80s. I'm sorry, I'm just
Yay.
I'm like repping the 80s today. I don't know.
I'm your gal for that, so.
Okay, so, I was a huge Peter David fan back in the day. Like, Peter David's Hulk run really meant a lot to me as someone who had trouble dealing with my emotions in a lot of ways. Like, Peter David really zeroed in on that aspect of the Hulk as someone who has a lot of trauma, but also has a lot of emotions that he can't handle, and that turns him into the Hulk. And like, building on Bill Mantlow's run, I mean, I can talk about the Hulk all day, I'm sorry. But anyway, so I was like obsessed with Peter David's Hulk, and so that led me to Peter David's X Factor, and then eventually to Peter David's Madrox, and more X Factor, and I really loved those issues. I loved, like, it's like Peter David's quirky, weird side. I didn't love it when, like, there was this weird thing where like a tween girl shows up and tells Madrox that she's going to be his wife, and that was like, I didn't like that. That was not good. I was like, bad Peter David, bad. But there was a lot of stuff I did love in there, and Wolfsbane was in a lot of those issues, which was my introduction to Wolfsbane. And then really like my kind of serious introduction to the X-Men was when Grant Morrison, somebody else I was a huge fan of, and am a huge fan of. Grant Morrison started writing the X-Men in like 2001-ish, and basically like my local used bookstore had like all 3 volumes of the new X-Men omnibus for like half price, like these giant hardcovers of all of Grant Morrison's new X-Men. And so I bought those and just like read them all in like a weekend. And so that was like a formative X-Men experience for me, was like Grant Morrison's new X-Men. And then I was also a huge fan of Joss Whedon. And so I picked up his Astonishing X-Men, and you know, we'll speak no more of that. But I don't know, and like I've been going back and reading. I've read bits, like, again, I haunted the quarter bins, so I used to just go and pick up random whatever you could get for like a quarter, or in some cases a dime. I would just buy all of it because I'm like, screw it, it's a quarter. And so I bought like just tons and tons of random X-Men comics, some of which were written by like Chris Claremont, and they were amazing, and some of which were written by Chuck Austin or Scott Lobdell, or, you know, and were interesting. So I read a ton of X-Men comics back in the day, but it's all kind of a blur for me. You know, the gift I've gotten in the last year is I've been going back and reading so much X-Men stuff, and, you know, just kind of hoovering up all the Claremont stuff, hoovering up everything that's been written in the last few years, all the Hickman stuff, and I love all of it so much. Like, it's just been an amazing time for an X-Men fan, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's a lot of commonality that way between like Morrison and the Hickman, the Hickman-led era. But to be real, it's a whole team that Hickman brought in that has come to do that. But yeah, those were both eras where I got back into the X-Men after being burned out on like the previous decade of stories. So like, yeah, I see a lot of like the DNA of Morrison X-Men in the stories you've been writing. Like, you know, you've been doing John Sublime and the U-Men. You know, Justice for Martha Johansson. I've just really loved seeing what you've done with that character, and like her and Escapade together.
Oh my gosh,
it's you know, it's a really great reparative story for like a character that has had some awkward stuff and like a traumatic beginning, and like I really loved seeing that brought out. So,
well, thank you.
That wasn't a question. That was just a comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. Like, Sarah, my editor, like, one of the things that Marvel's been incredibly chill about, just letting me do whatever the heck I want, way more than I thought I was going to be able to. Like, I've just been like, yeah, this happens. And, okay. And like, nobody has ever told me to stop. So my rule is, if they don't tell me to stop, I just don't stop. So, you know, but the one thing that Marvel has been kind of, the one note I've gotten from Marvel is, we want there to be villains with a capital V. And so, like, for those 3 issues I wrote of New Mutants, which are for sale in there as a trade paperback, they were like, we need a big villain that can make a splash. And like, Sarah was like, how about John Sublime? And I was like, this is embarrassing. I'd read all of those Grant Morrison issues, but that was like, you know, 20 years ago. So I was like, yeah, I mean, he's got a cool name. I don't remember anything about him, but sure, I'll do John Sublime. And like, then I went and did some research, and I was like, oh, that guy. And then I realized that, like, actually I was being given this amazing gift because, you know, Vida had done a wonderful job. Vida Ayala had done a wonderful job of moving a bunch of these characters forward, including giving Martha Johansson a new name and a new body and a new kind of lease on life. And Martha had not encountered John Sublime since he, you know, sorry, this is upsetting, but he basically took her brain out of her body and put it in like a weird globe thing and used her as a weapon and abused her horribly, and then she escaped, but she's never seen him since then. So I was like, oh, I'm writing the first meeting between these characters. Oh, that's a freaking gift. And so I really got, I wish I'd had like 3 more issues to deal with that, but I it was so intense and so amazing to get to do that.
Yeah, it was a great story for me. I think I already said it, but yeah, I really love how you're doing stories that are like in the here and now. You're using these new characters, and it's very accessible to like a new reader, I think. But like there are also these nods to history. I really liked a little moment in the most recent issue where like Wolfsbane and Morgan like come into the Morlock tunnels where these humans are squatting, and like the humans say, "We were here first," and Wolfsbane says, "No, you really weren't." And it was just like that little, the Mutant Massacre. The story's not about the Mutant Massacre exactly, but like it's situated that in the place. It took my breath away, just that little moment, because like there is all that. I don't know. I think there's a theme of like dealing with trauma that's coming out in your stories, and like that is one of the big formative traumas of the X-Men. So
yeah, I mean, I really, really, really wanted to have the Mutant Massacre in there, and like my original pitch, which I realized it was explained to me that did not make sense, was like, what if the Morlocks have some technology that Wolfsbane wants to find? And so then I was told, no, the Morlocks didn't really have any great technology. So I was like, okay. But they were like, some Spider-Man villains had lairs down there, so you can get them down into these tunnels where the Morlocks were, and then you can kind of talk about the Morlock Massacre. I really, really wanted to kind of talk. I mean, trauma is something that I've always really wanted to talk about in my work. Like, it's something that I think about a lot as a writer and as a human. I think it's something that, especially now, after the last, 5 years, we all have a lot of interesting stuff around trauma to deal with and to kind of process, and so I'm trying to process it as much as I can. And I don't know. I mean, I felt like including one of the formative traumas of the X-Men, of the mutants, is a way to kind of get at that and to kind of get at a different angle of this debate that Morgan and Wolfsbane are having, where Morgan is like, I can be a mutant without having to go live in the mutant nation and swear fealty to King Charles, the other King Charles, and I can be a mutant without it being my whole life. And Wolfsbane is like, yeah, there's this shared trauma that we have that's really important, and you have to understand that. And the kind of my pitch for that whole storyline, which I think you're gonna kind of, if you may have already gotten it, but you're definitely gonna get it in the next issue or two, is basically Sarabella, Martha Johansson, has a lot of trauma that she hasn't processed, that she hasn't been able to deal with, and she's kind of struggling with it. And instead of just sitting with her and letting her process her trauma, Sheila's like, I'm gonna fix your trauma by taking you on a heist, and it's gonna be great. And that turns out to actually not be the right way to deal with it, because that's Sheila's way of dealing with stuff, but it's not Martha's way of dealing with stuff. And it's like, let people deal with stuff in their own way is kind of the not so subtle message that I'm trying to get across.
Absolutely, and I really love that there's a lot of different perspectives that are clashing and coming up against each other in those stories. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I kind of wanted to move into maybe the topic that I've been most excited to talk about. And I'm going to start it by telling a little story. I have a trans kid. He's 14 years old, and because I'm me, I've been ever since they were little, I'm like, I'm gonna get them into comics, and they're gonna learn all the cool comics from me because I'm like the comics mom. And they've always bounced off of comics as a medium. They watch shows, they watch movies, they read books, but comics just didn't do it for them. And I kind of pushed it a little too hard back in the day. So I thought, well, I'm just backed off from that. I'm just not. We can enjoy other things together. It's fine. So when I got the call asking if I could be on stage with you today, I was so excited, and I was with my kid and some friends, and I told them all about it, and then I had to explain, well, who is Charlie Jane Anders? Who is Escapade? What is this thing? Why am I excited about this? So I explained all that to them. And then I pulled out my Pride issue with the Escapade story, and I was like, see, this is the character I was talking about. I flipped through it a little bit. This is her deal, whatever. And I just left it sitting there. I didn't think that he was going to he was going to think, oh, cool, and then go on with his thing. But then he just sort of independently walked over and picked it up and read the whole Pride issue cover to cover.
It's such a good issue in general. My story, whatever, but the rest of the issue is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess what I want to lead into with that is we are kind of in this new wave of like queer media, including like queer media for younger audiences. There's shows like She-Ra and Owl House and all the others. And there's a lot of cool queer comics, including from Marvel and DC now. So like, I guess just how do you like situate your work for Marvel in that context? Like, what does that all mean to you? Like, whatever you want to talk about in that realm.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've been just so, I love Owl House so much, and I wish we'd gotten another, 5 seasons of Owl House.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, so sad that it ended so abruptly, kind of. It just feels really cruel. But, and I loved She-Ra, and I love Steven Universe. I'm wearing my Steven
Yay.
Universe hoodie, so
Ooh.
that my partner got me. And, I feel like there's been this explosion of, really fun, accessible, kind of queer content that's kid friendly, but also adults love it, and that's made me really happy. And I feel like, I definitely consciously would like to be a part of that. My young adult books, I just published a young adult trilogy that's very queer and very colorful and silly and weird, and that's definitely a thing that I'm hoping teenagers of all sorts will appreciate, but especially queer teens. And, the comics are definitely part of that. I feel a sense of responsibility in a way that I didn't feel maybe 5 years ago as a trans creator. 5 years ago, I was yeah, I'm trans, I'm writing stuff. Transness is always going to come into it, of course, because I am who I am, but it's not I don't have a mission to be super trans or super queer in my work. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. You're holding a copy of The City in the Middle of the Night, which is a very queer book, but the queerness is something that you could just skate over if So I just, in the era we're living through, especially with what's happening with trans kids, not to bring the mood down, but what's happening and the laws that they're passing in a bunch of these states, like Florida and Tennessee and Texas, to just be as cruel as possible to trans kids and to trans people of all ages and to drag performers. There's just a war against positivity and a war against self-expression and a war against personhood for trans and queer people that is really shocking and horrifying. And I feel it is, it's all of our duty, just as much as we can, as much as we're able, and, as much as we have the spoons, as much as we feel moved to do so. I would never tell anybody, oh gosh, you don't have a story to tell about this, but you still have to do that anyway. Write the story you're dying to tell. But I do feel a sense of urgency to try and write stuff that is both comforting and exciting and accessible and where people can feel seen. And so that's something that I've really worked on a lot, and that's something that I really hope to be a part of. And I feel there's a lot of other people doing that right now. One Portland creator I love is Neil Cochrane. Probably mispronouncing his name too. Okay, that's right. Neil published a book recently called The Story of 100 Promises, which is this joyful queer fairy tale with trans and gender queer characters, and it's just amazing. And we need more stuff like that. We need so much more.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really excited that there is stuff like that coming out, and I really appreciate your work in that context.
Thank you.
And
God, you're wonderful. Thank you.
Like I said, my kid and I, we watched Steven Universe and Owl House and Dead End Paranormal Park and all this stuff together, and if something like this leads to us reading comics together too, that would be cool. But I don't know. I'm just really glad that that this is out there, and I'm really honored to be able to sit and talk with you about it.
Same, and thank you.